Aaron Hayes didn't hesitate. In the private dining room of the Whitmore Hotel in downtown Chicago, beneath crystal chandeliers and polished silver, he lifted a glass filled with murky water from a decorative bowl and poured it slowly over his wife's dress. The room froze. Then Mitchell Grant, CEO of Northbridge Freight Systems, laughed. Several executives followed. Samantha Torres Hayes stood still as the water dripped onto the marble floor. She did not argue. She did not cry. She simply looked at her husband long enough for something unspoken to settle in the air. None of them knew they were already being evaluated. None of them understood who truly held the power in that room. If you believe dignity doesn't have to shout to be powerful, stay with this story until the very end. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from and your local time. Stories like this travel far, and justice has no time zone. And if you stand for quiet strength and accountability, consider subscribing. There are more truths that deserve to be witnessed. Samantha Torres had learned early that silence was not weakness. It was calibration. She grew up in a small, sun-bleached neighborhood outside San Antonio, Texas, the daughter of Mexican immigrants who believed in two things above all else: education and restraint. Her father repaired air conditioning units in summer heat that blistered the skin. Her mother cleaned offices at night, often the same offices where men in tailored suits made decisions that shaped cities. Samantha studied at the kitchen table while her mother ironed uniforms. She listened more than she spoke. She learned how power moved quietly, invisibly, long before she ever stepped inside a courtroom. A scholarship carried her to Harvard Law School. She arrived with 2 suitcases and an accent she softened within months. There, she did not compete for attention. She competed for accuracy. Corporate law attracted her not because it was glamorous, but because it was precise. Numbers told stories. Contracts revealed intent. Compliance work exposed the space between what companies promised and what they actually did. Professors noticed the way she dismantled case studies without theatrics. She did not argue to win. She argued to clarify. After graduation, Hawthorne Equity Group recruited her into their compliance and corporate investigations division. Hawthorne was known for disciplined acquisitions, never impulsive, never sentimental. They purchased struggling companies, restructured them, and sold them at a profit. Samantha's role was simple in description and complex in execution. Find the truth inside the books before money changed hands. She spent years tracing irregularities others missed. Inflated revenue projections, deferred liabilities, executive bonuses disguised as consulting fees. She developed a reputation internally for something rare. She did not panic when she found corruption. She documented it. But there had been a case 3 years before she met Aaron Hayes that altered her trajectory. A manufacturing firm in Ohio. Clean public reports, private environmental violations. The executive team assured Hawthorne the liabilities were contained. Samantha's investigation proved otherwise. The cleanup costs would devastate entire communities. Hawthorne proceeded with the acquisition anyway. It was legal, it was profitable, it was defensible. It was not something she could reconcile. Samantha resigned quietly. No dramatic exit. No speeches about ethics. She told colleagues she wanted a slower pace. Hawthorne did not sever ties entirely. They placed her on a retainer as an external compliance consultant, an arrangement that allowed distance without disappearance. It was during that period of supposed quiet that she met Aaron. Aaron Hayes was everything Samantha was, not outwardly. Charismatic, quick to fill silence, effortlessly confident in rooms where introductions mattered. He worked in operations management for Northbridge Freight Systems, a logistics company expanding aggressively across the Midwest. They met at a mutual friend's engagement party. Aaron admired her composure. Samantha noticed his ambition. In the beginning, ambition did not frighten her. It impressed her. He spoke about optimizing distribution networks, about modernizing freight corridors, about building something enduring. He admired her discipline. He told her she was the most grounded person he had ever met. Their early years were balanced. Aaron asked for her opinion on contracts. She reviewed non-disclosure agreements at the kitchen counter while he cooked pasta badly but enthusiastically. They built routines, Sunday grocery lists, shared calendars, mutual respect. The promotion changed him. Northbridge named Aaron Senior Operations Director after a record quarter. The company was expanding into new markets. Investors were circling. The CEO, Mitchell Grant, began inviting Aaron to private strategy sessions. The new title altered the air around him. Subtle at first, he began correcting her in public lightly, as if teasing. He started referring to her legal background as useful instead of impressive. He stayed later at the office. His phone, once left casually on the coffee table, became an extension of his hand. Samantha noticed patterns before she noticed feelings. He deleted emails more frequently. He took calls on the balcony in colder weather than necessary. When she asked about company growth numbers, he responded with broad summaries instead of specifics. The vocabulary shifted. Less transparency, more performance. Northbridge's quarterly reports boasted accelerated revenue growth, almost improbably steady. Samantha read them the way she read case files. She did not distrust him immediately. She analyzed the structure. Revenue spikes coincided with expansion announcements, but were not accompanied by proportional capital expenditures. Deferred liabilities increased in footnotes. Operating costs were described vaguely. One evening, while Aaron showered after returning from a business trip, his laptop remained open on the dining table. Samantha did not touch it for several minutes, not because she feared what she might find, but because she understood that crossing certain thresholds changes marriages permanently. She did not open his emails. She opened a blank document on her own computer instead. She began to log observations. Dates of unusual behavior, financial discrepancies in public filings, names of executives mentioned casually in conversation, Mitchell Grant, Brian Keller, the CFO. She recorded phrases Aaron repeated: temporary restructuring, strategic adjustments, short-term positioning. The document was not an accusation. It was a timeline. Aaron's transformation accelerated after Mitchell began hosting private executive dinners. Samantha attended 2 during the first year of his promotion. She observed how Mitchell rewarded loyalty, not competence. Executives laughed too quickly at his jokes. They agreed before he finished sentences. Mitchell treated Samantha with polite dismissal. He asked where she had studied, nodded at Harvard, and moved on to speak with investors. She saw the calculation immediately. She was ornamental in his framework. A supportive spouse, an accessory. Aaron seemed to accept that positioning. The first time he referred to her as overly cautious in front of colleagues, she did not respond. The second time, she registered the pattern. By the third, she understood it was deliberate. Still, she did not confront him. Confrontation without evidence is emotion. Samantha preferred documentation. She reactivated old professional habits, public corporate filings, industry reports, regulatory disclosures. Northbridge's expansion into 2 new states required transportation compliance adjustments that were filed late, though not publicly penalized. Late filings rarely happen in disciplined companies. One night, Aaron mentioned casually that Hawthorne Equity Group had expressed preliminary interest in strategic investment opportunities within the logistics sector. Samantha's pulse did not change. Hawthorne had not informed her of specific targets. As an external compliance advisor, she received limited disclosure until due diligence formally began. But she understood how Hawthorne operated. They moved when companies appeared strong, but internally strained. Northbridge fit the profile. Aaron described the potential partnership as validation. Mitchell says this could be transformative, he told her. It proves we've built something investors trust. Samantha smiled faintly. Trust was not the word she would have chosen. Over the following weeks, Aaron's defensiveness increased. He began locking his study. He withdrew funds from their joint account for what he described as temporary cash positioning, though his salary more than covered expenses. Samantha did not accuse him of misconduct. She did not search his drawers. She did not demand transparency. She collected information. In quiet moments, she remembered the Ohio manufacturing case, the executives who had smiled through environmental violations, the way confidence can mask structural collapse. She also remembered the early days of her marriage, when Aaron had asked her opinion with genuine curiosity. The tragedy, though no one recognized it yet, was not the fraud forming beneath Northbridge's polished reports. It was the erosion of mutual respect inside their home. Aaron believed power meant rising above scrutiny. Samantha knew power meant surviving it. She could already see the trajectory. She understood the risk curves, the regulatory triggers, the thresholds at which external audits become unavoidable. She knew what happened when inflated numbers met forensic accounting. She also knew something Aaron did not. Hawthorne Equity had not forgotten her. And if Northbridge truly entered formal review, Samantha would not be a spectator. For now, she continued to cook dinner. She continued to listen. She continued to write down what others dismissed as small inconsistencies. Silence in her hands was never surrender. It was preparation. Aaron Hayes believed success was something you performed until it became undeniable. Northbridge Freight Systems had begun as a regional logistics firm, specializing in refrigerated transport across Illinois and Wisconsin. Under Mitchell Grant's leadership, it had expanded into multi-state freight coordination, warehouse optimization, and high-volume distribution contracts. Investors admired growth curves. Mitchell admired loyalty. Aaron admired both. As Senior Operations Director, he became the public face of Northbridge's efficiency narrative. He spoke at transportation conferences about streamlined infrastructure. He appeared in trade magazines discussing scalable frameworks. His LinkedIn endorsements multiplied. His calendar filled. At home, he began practicing keynote speeches in front of the hallway mirror. Samantha watched without commentary. The company's reported revenue growth was impressive. 17% one quarter, 19% the next. Industry analysts cited Northbridge as a model of disciplined expansion. Mitchell encouraged media coverage, emphasizing internal unity and executive cohesion. Yet beneath public filings, the structure told a quieter story. Operating margins widened, even as fuel costs fluctuated unpredictably. Capital expenditures remained curiously flat, despite expansion into 2 additional distribution hubs. Deferred maintenance costs appeared in footnotes, but were not reflected proportionally in balance sheets. To an untrained eye, the numbers were ambitious. To Samantha, they were compressed. She did not access internal systems. She did not need to. Public disclosures often revealed enough when read with patience. She spent evenings at the dining table, reviewing quarterly reports the way others might read novels. She highlighted patterns. She annotated inconsistencies. Aaron noticed the highlighter once. "You're still doing that?" he asked, half amused. Reading, she replied evenly. Analyzing everything, he clarified. "You don't work for them." She met his gaze calmly. "No," she said. "I don't." The distinction lingered between them longer than either acknowledged. Mitchell Grant was not a reckless man. He was deliberate, controlled, and attentive to optics. He favored executives who understood hierarchy. Aaron fit the profile, perfectly ambitious enough to execute directives, disciplined enough not to question them publicly. Mitchell began inviting Aaron to smaller strategy meeting sessions, not listed on company calendars. Aaron returned from those meetings, energized, carrying language that sounded rehearsed. "We're restructuring reporting timelines," he explained one evening. Why, Samantha asked, not accusatory, simply curious. To align with projected contracts. Projected was a subtle word, a forward-looking one. Projection is not falsification, but projection becomes misrepresentation when it solidifies prematurely into declared revenue. Samantha logged the conversation in her private document. Weeks later, Northbridge announced a partnership with a regional distributor in Indiana. The press release described the contract as secured. The fine print described it as pending final approval. Approval from whom was unclear. Aaron's behavior grew more compartmentalized. He carried 2 phones, one corporate, one personal. The personal device remained face down more frequently. When Samantha entered the room, unexpectedly, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Suspicion did not rush through her. Pattern recognition did. One evening, while Aaron slept beside her, his breathing steady and unaware, Samantha lay awake considering timelines. She thought about regulatory bodies, the Securities and Exchange Commission, state commerce departments, internal compliance officers, whose job was to ask inconvenient questions. Fraud rarely begins as criminal intent. It begins as adjustment, a temporary smoothing of numbers to maintain investor confidence, a delayed liability report to protect quarterly optics, a strategic optimism that drifts into fabrication. She did not know yet whether Northbridge had crossed that line, but she could feel proximity. At a charity gala hosted by a transportation association, Samantha observed Mitchell more closely than before. He greeted donors with warmth, they shook hands with calculated firmness, and made jokes about outpacing the competition. During dinner, Mitchell leaned toward Aaron. "Once Hawthorne circles officially," he said quietly, though not quietly enough, "we finalize everything. Clean presentation. No surprises." Aaron nodded. Samantha registered the phrase, "no surprises." In corporate language, it meant uniform messaging. In compliance language, it meant selective disclosure. She returned home that night and searched public records regarding Hawthorne Equity Group's recent acquisitions. There were none in the freight sector announced publicly. But Hawthorne often conducted exploratory reviews before any public filing. If Hawthorne was circling, it meant preliminary financial access had likely been requested. If preliminary access had been granted, someone at Northbridge was preparing curated documents. Samantha did not contact Hawthorne immediately. Her consulting agreement required discretion. She could not insert herself into a review unless formally engaged. But she reviewed her contract terms carefully. External advisors could be reactivated for sector-specific compliance analysis. Logistics and freight fell within her documented expertise. Meanwhile, at Northbridge headquarters, pressure intensified. Brian Keller, the company's CFO, had begun arriving earlier and leaving later. Aaron mentioned Brian's stress management issues casually over breakfast. "He worries too much," Aaron said. "Mitchell says he lacks vision. Vision can distort risk assessment." One Friday afternoon, Samantha attended a luncheon with former colleagues from Hawthorne. The conversation drifted toward market trends. When freight logistics emerged as a topic, one colleague commented lightly, "There's an interesting company in Chicago we're examining. Aggressive growth, some irregular timing and revenue recognition." Samantha did not ask the company's name. She did not need to. She asked instead, "Is the compliance review internal or external?" "Preliminary external," the colleague replied. "Why, no reason," she said gently. "Just curious." Curiosity in her voice never sounded threatening. At home that evening, Aaron celebrated a major breakthrough. He opened a bottle of wine and described what he called pre-acquisition alignment. Mitchell had assured the executive team that Hawthorne's interest signaled validation. "They wouldn't look at us if we weren't solid," Aaron said confidently. Samantha watched him pour wine into crystal glasses. Validation, she knew, was not Hawthorne's objective. Exposure was. She did not correct him. Instead, she asked, "Have they requested updated revenue reconciliation?" Aaron paused for half a second too long. "They're reviewing standard materials," he replied. Standard materials. Companies under review often submit curated packets first. Full transparency comes later, sometimes too late. Samantha sensed something else beneath Aaron's confidence, anxiety masked as certainty. He needed the acquisition to proceed. His reputation, his trajectory, his self-concept depended on it. He had begun to equate corporate growth with personal worth. The tragedy unfolding was not dramatic yet. There were no raids, no headlines, no confrontations. Just incremental shifts. Aaron stopped asking her professional opinions altogether. He framed discussions as monologues. He corrected her interpretations of industry trends despite her deeper experience. At a dinner with 2 junior executives, Aaron joked that Samantha retired because she couldn't handle high-pressure environments. The table laughed politely. Samantha smiled faintly. Retirement was a convenient narrative. It obscured the moral disagreement that had led her away from Hawthorne's Ohio case. It also reassured Aaron that she no longer occupied a sphere that could intersect with his. He did not understand that compliance professionals never fully leave their discipline. They carry it like a second language. One Sunday morning, while Aaron played golf with Mitchell and other executives, Samantha opened her laptop and created a new folder. Northbridge Preliminary Observations. Inside it, she placed public filings, annotated reports, and her timeline document. She cross-referenced revenue announcements with contract confirmation dates. She mapped projected income against disclosed liabilities. The pattern was subtle, but consistent revenue recognized in advance of confirmed service delivery. Not illegal by default, but dangerous if systematic. She closed the folder and sat still for several minutes. In another part of the city, Mitchell Grant was discussing seamless integration with Aaron over 18 holes. Neither man considered the possibility that the quietest person in Aaron's life was assembling a clearer picture than either of them. Neither asked what Samantha saw when she read. Neither understood that she did not need confrontation to influence outcome. She needed documentation, and documentation was accumulating. The invitation arrived on a Wednesday evening, delivered not with ceremony, but with assumption. Aaron stepped into the kitchen, loosened his tie, and set his phone on the counter. "Mitchell's hosting a private dinner next Friday," he said, opening the refrigerator without looking at her. "Executive team. A few key people from the investment side. You'll come." It was not phrased as a question. Samantha stood at the stove, stirring a slow, simmering sauce. "What's the occasion?" she asked calmly. "Preliminary alignment," Aaron replied. "Hawthorne sending senior representatives. It's informal but important. Mitchell wants to show stability. Family image, family image." She turned the burner down and faced him. "And what exactly is my role in this alignment?" Aaron smiled, the kind he used in networking photographs. "Just be yourself. Intelligent, polished. It reflects well. Samantha held his gaze a moment longer than usual. "Of course," she said. He returned to his phone, already typing. Later that night, after Aaron had fallen asleep, Samantha remained in the living room with her laptop open. Her consulting email account, used rarely accessed, carefully contained a new encrypted message from Hawthorne Equity Group. Subject: Preliminary Logistics Sector, Review, External Advisor, Availability. She read it once, then again. Hawthorne was initiating a formal due diligence review of a Midwestern freight operations firm exhibiting accelerated growth metrics and acquisition positioning. The message did not name the company in the subject line. It did not need to. Inside the secure attachment was the name: Northbridge Freight Systems. Samantha closed her eyes briefly, not in shock, but in confirmation. The alignment dinner was not celebration. It was choreography. Hawthorne's internal compliance team would begin document requests within the week. External advisors, sector specialists, would be brought in after preliminary review. She reread the final line of the email. "Given your expertise in revenue recognition, compliance, and transportation sector structuring, we would value your availability pending conflict review." Conflict review. Samantha understood the meaning. Her marriage constituted potential conflict. Hawthorne's legal team would evaluate disclosure obligations. If she declared her relationship to a senior executive at Northbridge, they might remove her from the review. If she did not, and the relationship surfaced later, it could invalidate proceedings. Silence in this case was not strategy. It was liability. She drafted a response carefully. I confirm my marriage to Aaron Hayes, Senior Operations Director at Northbridge Freight Systems. I request formal conflict assessment before further engagement. She sent the email. Then she waited. Aaron slept undisturbed. By morning, Hawthorne's legal counsel responded. Conflict acknowledged. Given your non-operational status within Northbridge and absence of shared corporate equity, you may serve as external compliance consultant provided strict separation protocols are maintained. All findings must be documented formally. No informal access. Samantha read the message twice. No informal access. The phrase settled heavily. She would not search Aaron's devices. She would not exploit private marital information. If Northbridge had irregularities, they would surface through official channels. Her role would be observation and documentation within legal boundaries. The dinner invitation now carried different weight. On Friday evening, Aaron dressed with unusual precision. Dark navy suit, silver cufflinks, a watch he reserved for investor meetings. He watched Samantha from the doorway as she selected a charcoal gray dress, elegant, understated. You look perfect, he said approvingly. She nodded slightly. During the drive to the Whitmore Hotel, Aaron rehearsed talking points. Mitchell might bring up projected Q4 figures, he said. If that happens, just let me handle it. The investment team doesn't need deep dives tonight. I wouldn't presume to speak for your company, Samantha replied evenly. He did not detect the nuance. The Whitmore's private executive dining room glowed under chandeliers calibrated for warmth rather than brightness. A long polished table stretched across the center set with crystal stemware and minimalist floral arrangements. Discretion defined the space. Conversations here did not echo beyond walls. Mitchell Grant stood near the head of the table, laughing broadly as guests arrived. He embraced Aaron with performative enthusiasm. There he is, Mitchell declared, the man of the hour. His eyes moved to Samantha briefly. And the better half. Samantha extended her hand. Good evening, Mr. Grant. Mitchell, he corrected lightly, though his tone implied hierarchy. We're all friends tonight. She registered the subtle boundary and formal address, granted equality, not implied. Across the table sat 3 representatives from Hawthorne Equity Group. Samantha recognized one of them, Laura Bennett, Senior Acquisitions Director. Their eyes met briefly. No recognition showed on Laura's face. Professional discipline required it. Samantha took her seat beside Aaron. The first hour unfolded predictably. Wine circulated. Courses arrived in measured intervals. Mitchell narrated Northbridge's growth story with practiced cadence. 17% quarter over quarter, he said confidently. Operational efficiency at scale. We've anticipated every expansion variable. Laura listened without interruption. Another Hawthorne representative asked neutral questions about fleet depreciation schedules. Aaron responded smoothly, citing prepared numbers. Samantha observed not only what was said, but what was omitted. No mention of deferred liabilities. No clarification on pending contract approvals. No elaboration on timing discrepancies between reported revenue and service fulfillment. Mitchell controlled the rhythm of conversation expertly. He redirected inquiries toward future projections rather than past reconciliations. At one point, he gestured toward Samantha. Aaron tells me you used to be in law, he said casually. Corporate, was it? Yes, she replied. Compliance and financial investigations. The table quieted for half a second. Investigations, Mitchell repeated lightly, as if amused. Sounds intense. Only when necessary, Samantha answered. Aaron shifted slightly in his chair. Mitchell raised his glass. Well, we have nothing to worry about here. Laughter circled the table. Samantha noted the phrase, nothing to worry about. The second course arrived. Conversation grew louder as wine refilled glasses more generously. Aaron relaxed, visibly buoyed by Mitchell's approval. He placed his hand at the small of Samantha's back, a gesture that felt less affectionate than demonstrative. Mitchell leaned forward again. The key, he said, is trust. Hawthorne invests in leadership, and leadership means unity. No internal contradictions. Unity. Samantha sensed the subtext dissent would be interpreted as instability. Laura Bennett's expression remained neutral. As dessert approached, Aaron's composure began to thin. He spoke more freely, boasting about operational shortcuts that accelerated reporting cycles. He used phrases like creative alignment and strategic smoothing. Samantha recognized the euphemisms instantly. Creative alignment often means adjusted categorization. Strategic smoothing often means delayed recognition of loss. She remained silent. Mitchell signaled for a final round of drinks. Next Friday, he said. Raising his glass, we formalize everything. The room responded with measured optimism. Samantha's phone vibrated softly inside her clutch. She did not check it immediately. She waited until conversation swelled again before glancing discreetly at the screen. A secure notification from Hawthorne. Document request sent to Northbridge executive team. Formal due diligence initiated. Her eyes lifted slowly to Aaron, who was mid-sentence describing projected fourth-quarter revenue with growing confidence. He did not know the request had already been transmitted. He did not know that official scrutiny had begun before the first toast ended. Across the table, Laura Bennett's gaze met Samantha's once more brief, unreadable discipline. The choreography was ending. The evaluation had begun, and none of the men discussing unity understood that the structure beneath their performance was about to be tested by someone who had spent her life studying exactly this kind of narrative. Samantha folded her hands neatly in her lap. Silence again was not surrender. It was alignment with truth. The evening did not fracture all at once. It thinned. After the official toasts, after the polished assurances and carefully phrased projections, the room shifted into something looser. Jackets were unbuttoned, ties loosened. The waitstaff refilled glasses without being asked. Laughter grew louder, less measured. Mitchell Grant thrived in that second phase of a dinner, the unscripted hour where hierarchy softened just enough to reinforce itself. He moved from seat to seat, clapping shoulders, retelling anecdotes about early company struggles that had grown more heroic with repetition. Aaron followed his lead. Confidence had always come easily to him, but tonight it was inflated by proximity to power. Hawthorne's representatives had not challenged him directly. They had not confronted discrepancies. In his mind, silence equaled approval. Samantha watched the shift in him with the calm attention of someone observing weather patterns she already understood. The dessert plates were cleared. A decorative glass bowl filled with water and floating white orchids sat at the center of the table. It had been ornamental all evening, untouched, irrelevant. Mitchell was recounting a story about a competitor who had collapsed under poor leadership. Laughter erupted again. Aaron leaned back in his chair, flushed from wine. That's because they didn't control the narrative, he said. You have to stay ahead of perception. Mitchell pointed at him approvingly. Exactly. One of Hawthorne's junior analysts asked a quiet question about deferred fleet maintenance costs. It was not accusatory. It was procedural. Aaron waved a hand dismissively. All accounted for, he said. You'll see it in the final documentation. Samantha knew the documentation had been requested less than an hour earlier. Mitchell shifted the conversation away quickly. We're celebrating tonight, he said lightly. Numbers are for next week. Another round of laughter. Aaron's confidence tipped into performance. He turned slightly towards Samantha. My wife thinks in numbers all the time, he said, grinning at the table. She used to interrogate spreadsheets for fun. A few polite chuckles. She probably has a secret file on all of us, he added. The tone was playful, but there was an edge beneath it. Samantha smiled faintly. Documentation is rarely secret, she said. It's just organized. Mitchell smirked. See, that's why I leave compliance to the professionals. The word professionals hung in the air with subtle exclusion. Aaron reached toward the center of the table, fingers grazing the rim of the decorative bowl. Relax, he said lightly to Samantha. You don't have to audit everything. She did not respond. Across from her, Laura Bennett observed the exchange without expression. Aaron lifted his wine glass, found it empty, and glanced around for the waiter. None was immediately near. His eyes fell back on the glass bowl. "Guess this will have to do," he joked. There was still time for someone to redirect to caution, to interrupt the arc of what was about to happen. No one did. Aaron dipped his wine glass into the decorative bowl, scooping cloudy water clouded faintly by flower stems and table dust. A few droplets spilled onto the linen tablecloth. The room reacted with amused surprise. Mitchell laughed first. Aaron turned towards Samantha, grin-wide eyes bright with alcohol and approval. "Don't look so serious," he said. "Lighten up." And then, with theatrical exaggeration, he tipped the glass forward. The water spilled over the front of Samantha's charcoal gray dress. It darkened the fabric, instantly trailing down to the hem and dripping onto the marble floor. The orchids in the bowl trembled. For a moment there was silence, not the disciplined silence of negotiation, but the stunned pause of miscalculation. Then Mitchell laughed. It was loud, sharp, unrestrained. A few executives joined him, uncertain at first, then committed. Someone muttered, "It's just water." Aaron leaned back in his chair, pleased with the reaction. "See," he said lightly, "not everything has to be so controlled." Samantha remained seated for exactly 3 seconds, long enough for the water to seep through the lining of her dress, long enough for the laughter to register fully, long enough for Laura Bennett's eyes to narrow, almost imperceptibly. Then Samantha stood. The movement was unhurried, deliberate. She placed her napkin on the table beside her plate. She did not look at the stain. She did not check the damage. She did not speak. She looked at Aaron, not with anger, not with humiliation, with assessment. In that look was a quiet recalibration. A final data point entered into a file that had been building for months. Aaron's smile faltered, not because he felt remorse, but because her reaction did not match his expectation. He had anticipated embarrassment, perhaps protest, at minimum visible discomfort. He did not receive it. Mitchell, still amused, said, "Come on, Aaron. Buy the lady another drink." More laughter. Samantha's gaze shifted briefly to Mitchell. It lingered just long enough for him to register that she was not participating in the joke. Then she spoke. "Excuse me," she said calmly. 2 words, no accusation, no tremor. She stepped away from the table, heels steady against marble. The waitstaff parted without being instructed. Behind her, the room resumed its noise. Aaron shrugged, leaning toward Mitchell. "She takes things too seriously sometimes," he said lightly. Mitchell nodded. "You'll train that out of her." Laura Bennett did not laugh. In the restroom, Samantha stood before a wide mirror framed in soft light. The water had left irregular patterns across her dress. It would stain. She pressed a paper towel gently against the fabric, absorbing what she could. Her reflection looked unchanged, composed, alert. Inside her clutch, her phone vibrated again. Another secure message from Hawthorne. Northbridge response pending. CFO acknowledgement received. Samantha inhaled slowly. She thought not of humiliation, but of timing. Aaron had crossed a boundary publicly. Not because he despised her, not because he intended cruelty with premeditation, but because he believed the room belonged to him. He believed laughter insulated him from consequence. He believed she would absorb the moment and return quietly to her seat. In the dining room, Mitchell began describing projected post-acquisition restructuring. Aaron listened eagerly, his earlier action already dissolving into anecdote. No one in that room understood what had just been recorded, not on camera, not yet in documents, but in perception. Laura Bennett excused herself minutes later and stepped into the corridor. She found Samantha near the elevators. "Are you all right?" Laura asked softly. Samantha met her eyes. "Yes." Laura hesitated, then said carefully, "Due diligence formally begins Monday. You'll receive documentation access tomorrow." Samantha nodded. No further acknowledgement passed between them. The alliance was professional, the silence intentional. When Samantha returned to the dining room, her posture was unchanged. She resumed her seat without commentary. The stain remained visible. Erin avoided her eyes, now slightly irritated by her refusal to react. The rest of the evening dissolved into logistics chatter and promises of future success. But something fundamental had shifted. Not in the room, in the structure beneath it. Erin believed the moment was trivial, an indulgent joke amplified by alcohol. Mitchell believed it reinforced hierarchy. Neither man recognized that respect, once publicly withdrawn, rarely returns intact, and neither understood that the woman they had just reduced to spectacle was already positioned at the threshold of a process far more precise than humiliation. Samantha folded her hands in her lap once more. The dinner would end. The documentation would arrive. And what had begun as performance would soon be measured against evidence. They drove home in silence. The city lights of Chicago moved past the windshield in blurred reflections, gold and white streaks bending against the glass. Erin kept one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting loosely near the gear shift. The radio played low, some late-night jazz station he favored when he wanted to signal composure. He did not apologize. Instead, after several blocks, he exhaled sharply. "You didn't have to make it so dramatic." Samantha turned her head slightly toward him. Dramatic. "The way you just stood there," he clarified. Everyone was laughing. It was a joke. She looked back at the road ahead. Was it Erin tightened his grip on the wheel? "You always do this. You turn small things into moral statements." She did not respond, because this was not about morality. It was about pattern. At home, she removed the dress carefully and laid it flat across the bathtub edge. The water stain had dried into uneven outlines. It would not fully disappear. She took a photograph. Not for social media, not for memory, for record. Then she changed into a soft cotton sweater and sat at the dining table with her laptop. Erin remained in the bedroom, pacing briefly before finally settling into bed. He assumed the evening would fade by morning. Most public humiliations did when the injured party refused escalation. He did not understand that Samantha did not escalate because she did not need to. Her encrypted inbox contained 3 new messages from Hawthorne Equity Group. The first confirmed that Northbridge's executive team had acknowledged receipt of formal due diligence documentation requests. The second listed categories of requested materials: detailed revenue recognition schedules, contract confirmation documentation, fleet depreciation records, executive compensation breakdowns, internal communications regarding Q3, Q4 revenue projections. The third message granted Samantha secure portal access beginning Monday morning. She read each document with steady attention. Then she opened a new file. Northbridge conflict log. Inside, she wrote Friday 9:42 p.m. public conduct by Senior Operations Director Erin Hayes during executive investor dinner. Impaired judgment observed. Potential reputational risk to company during active acquisition review. She paused, then added, behavior consistent with increasing pattern of performative authority reinforcement. She did not write emotionally. She did not describe humiliation. She described conduct. Language, when precise, carries weight without accusation. In the bedroom, Erin scrolled through his phone. Messages from colleagues rolled in. Mitchell. Hell of a night. Keep that energy. Brian Keller, CFO. We need to talk Monday before documents go out. Erin replied quickly to Mitchell with a laughing emoji. To Brian, he wrote, "What's the issue?" Brian's reply came after several minutes. The issue is timing. Some of the revenue allocations haven't been reconciled internally yet. Erin frowned. They had discussed smoothing timelines before. It was standard strategic positioning, revenue recognized based on anticipated contract closure, deferred costs adjusted forward. Nothing illegal, he had been assured. Just alignment. He typed back, Mitchell approved everything. Brian responded, that doesn't change documentation. Erin set the phone down. Documentation. He disliked the word. In the dining room, Samantha opened her previous timeline file and began integrating new developments. She added notes about the dinner, not the act itself, but the context. Executive overconfidence during active review phase. Dismissal of compliance inquiry from Hawthorne analyst. Public minimization of reporting discrepancies. She saved the file. Then she opened her banking application. The joint account showed 2 recent transfers labeled Consulting Adjustment, each for amounts just under 5 figures. She did not confront him immediately. She opened a separate spreadsheet and log date, amount, description, cross-reference to Northbridge executive compensation disclosures. The company's last public filing listed Aaron's bonus structure. The numbers did not match these transfers. Possible explanation performance incentive outside disclosed package. Possible risk undisclosed executive compensation. She did not assume wrongdoing. She flagged discrepancy. In the bedroom, Aaron's irritation shifted to unease. He replayed the dinner moment in his mind. The laughter, Mitchell's approval, Samantha's stillness. Her silence unsettled him more than anger would have. Anger is negotiable. Silence is not. He rose and walked into the dining room. Samantha did not look up immediately. "We're not going to make this a thing, are we?" he asked. She closed her laptop slowly. "What would you define as a thing?" she asked evenly. He exhaled. "It was water. I was joking." "In front of investors," she replied. "You're not one of them," he said reflexively. The statement lingered between them. Not one of them, not equal, not relevant. Samantha held his gaze calmly. "No," she said, "I'm not." Aaron ran a hand through his hair. "Mitchell thinks you're intense." "Does he? He said you look at people like you're evaluating them?" "I usually am." Aaron laughed lightly, but it lacked conviction. "See, that's what I mean." He wanted her to reassure him, to say she was not judging, to say the dinner meant nothing. Instead, she asked, "When does Hawthorne receive full revenue reconciliation?" He blinked. "Why would you know that? Because you mentioned that they were reviewing standard materials." He hesitated. "Next week, before or after contract confirmation?" "Before," he said automatically. She nodded once. He felt interrogated, though her tone had remained neutral. "This isn't your case," he said defensively. "It's my company." Samantha stood slowly. "No," she agreed softly. "It's not my company." And in that moment, she understood something clearly. Northbridge was no longer simply Aaron's workplace. It was an entity entering formal scrutiny. And she was now officially connected to that scrutiny. In her inbox, another message appeared this time, from Hawthorne's internal compliance director. "Given your marital connection, all findings must be submitted through encrypted channel. No informal discussion with Northbridge executives. Maintain documentation integrity at all times." Documentation integrity. She read the phrase twice. It meant that whatever she discovered would carry legal consequence. It meant that if discrepancies escalated into fraud, the outcome would not be social embarrassment. It would be regulatory intervention. In the living room, Aaron returned to the couch uneasy, but unwilling to articulate why. He believed problems were resolved through confidence. Samantha believed problems were resolved through evidence. She opened her laptop once more. From the secure portal preview, Hawthorne had uploaded preliminary data Northbridge had already submitted. Summary revenue sheet. Projected Q4 growth 22%. She compared it to public filings. The numbers were not identical. The difference was small, less than 2%. But 2% across multi-million-dollar contracts is not rounding error. It is exposure. Samantha saved the document. Then she closed the laptop gently. The dinner humiliation would not be her catalyst. It was merely confirmation. What mattered now was process. She would not retaliate. She would not accuse. She would evaluate. And if the structure beneath Northbridge's performance failed compliance standards, it would not collapse because she shouted. It would collapse because documentation required it. In the quiet of the apartment, the air felt thinner, not with anger, but with inevitability. Aaron believed he controlled the narrative. Mitchell believed he controlled the optics. Neither realized that the most consequential control had already shifted to a woman who never raised her voice when facts were sufficient. Monday began without ceremony. Aaron left early, dressed sharply, carrying the kind of focus that signaled performance mode. He kissed Samantha lightly on the cheek, a gesture that felt procedural rather than affectionate. "Big week," he said. "Once we send everything over, this moves fast." "I'm sure it will," she replied. After the door closed, the apartment settled into a different rhythm. No hurried footsteps, no rehearsed phone calls, just quiet. At precisely 8:00 a.m., Samantha logged into Hawthorne's secure portal. A new folder had been populated overnight. Northbridge initial submission package. She opened the revenue reconciliation file first. The spreadsheet was extensive, multiple tabs detailing contracts, projected income streams, and categorized expenses. To most reviewers, it would appear thorough. Samantha did not look for what was visible. She looked for timing. Revenue was recognized in Q3 for contracts marked anticipated execution early Q4. The documentation column listed pending signatures. Some entries referenced verbal agreements. Others cited strategic alignment confirmation. She highlighted 12 entries. Then she opened the fleet depreciation schedule. Vehicles acquired during expansion were listed as fully operational immediately upon purchase, though delivery confirmation dates suggested staggered deployment. Recognition before utilization. Another flag. She did not conclude fraud. She documented discrepancy. At 8:47 a.m., a notification appeared in the portal. Internal communication file upload. Executive email thread. Samantha clicked. The thread began 6 weeks earlier. Mitchell Grant. "We need Q3 to reflect forward momentum. Delay liability reporting until Q4 reconciliation. Brian Keller, CFO. That compresses our margin exposure. Mitchell temporary compression is manageable. Perception drives investment." Aaron Hayes. "If we align projected revenue with expected closures, optics stabilize." Samantha reread the message Aaron had written. "If we align projected revenue with expected closures, language matters. Align projected revenue is not the same as recognize actual revenue." She exported the thread into her documentation log. At Northbridge headquarters, Aaron sat in a glass-walled conference room with Mitchell and Brian Keller. The atmosphere was controlled but strained. Brian pushed a printed spreadsheet across the table. "We need to clarify recognition timing before Hawthorne requests supporting contracts." Mitchell leaned back. "They've seen growth trajectories. They're not auditing us, they're evaluating scalability." "They are auditing," Brian said quietly. Aaron felt irritation rise. "We've done nothing illegal," he said. Brian met his eyes. "Not yet." The word "yet" lingered. Aaron dismissed it internally. Compliance teams exaggerated risk. It was their function. Back at the apartment, Samantha opened the executive compensation disclosures. Public filing listed Aaron's annual bonus structure tied to operational efficiency metrics. The joint account transfers labeled consulting adjustment did not appear in disclosed compensation. She cross-referenced dates. The transfers corresponded with quarters where revenue recognition had been most aggressively aligned. Possibility supplemental executive incentive for maintaining projected margins. She marked it as potential undisclosed compensation. Then she accessed the audio archive. Northbridge had uploaded a compressed file containing recorded internal strategy calls required under acquisition transparency guidelines. She listened through headphones. Mitchell's voice carried confidence. "We smooth Q3, we stabilize perception, Hawthorne commits. After acquisition restructuring absorbs variance." Brian's voice sounded strained. "If they conduct forensic review, they won't," Mitchell interrupted. "They don't want collapse. They want control." Aaron's voice entered later. "We just need to hold alignment through signing. After that, we manage internally." Samantha paused the audio. "Hold alignment through signing." That phrase, more than any spreadsheet, revealed intent. Intent distinguishes optimism from misrepresentation. She documented timestamp references. At Northbridge, Aaron's phone vibrated. Hawthorne portal access confirmed. He felt a flicker of unease. The process had accelerated faster than he anticipated. Mitchell reassured him. They move fast when they're interested. Aaron nodded, but Brian remained silent. By noon, Samantha had compiled 23 documented inconsistencies, none individually catastrophic. Together they formed structural vulnerability. She encrypted her preliminary memo. Subject: initial observations, revenue recognition, timing and executive compensation variance. The memo did not accuse, it outlined patterns. Revenue recognized prior to contract execution. Deferred liabilities shifted between quarters without corresponding disclosure. Supplemental executive transfers inconsistent with public filings. Email and audio evidence, suggesting intent to align perception. She concluded with a measured sentence. Recommendation: initiate forensic accounting review prior to acquisition commitment. She sent the memo through the encrypted channel. Minutes later, Hawthorne's compliance director acknowledged receipt. Forensic review approved. Discretion mandatory. Samantha closed her laptop and sat back. This was the trigger point. Forensic accounting would not rely on executive summaries. It would examine transaction-level data, bank transfers, contract signatures, time-stamped approvals. At Northbridge, Brian Keller received a notification. Hawthorne requesting full transaction ledger access, Q2 and Q3. Brian's face drained of color. "They're escalating," he said. Mitchell's jaw tightened. "Standard procedure." "It's not standard at this stage," Brian replied. Aaron felt a tightening in his chest he could not categorize. "We give them what they ask for," he said. Mitchell turned to him. "Of course we do." But confidence no longer filled the room the way it had on Friday night. In the apartment, Samantha opened the joint bank account again. Another transfer had been scheduled pending release. She documented it. Then she opened a separate folder labeled Personal. Inside, she created a subfolder, Marriage Financial Review. She paused before typing. Not because of doubt, because she understood that once personal finances intersected formal investigation, separation becomes inevitable. She began listing shared assets, mortgage documents, retirement accounts, joint investments. If regulatory action unfolded, asset exposure would follow. Preparation is not paranoia. It is foresight. Her phone vibrated. Aaron. She let it ring once, then answered. "They're asking for transaction-level data," he said without greeting. "Yes," she replied calmly. "How did you know standard escalation?" There was silence on the line. "It's routine," he insisted, perhaps to himself more than to her. "Then you have nothing to worry about," she said gently. He hesitated. "Brian thinks they're overreaching." "Brian understands documentation," she replied. Aaron exhaled. "You're not enjoying this, are you?" Enjoyment had never been relevant. "No," she said quietly. "I'm observing it." After the call ended, she stared at the blank wall for several moments. The dinner humiliation had faded into irrelevance compared to what was unfolding. This was no longer about disrespect. It was about structural truth. Northbridge's growth story was being measured against its accounting reality. And Samantha, who had spent years dissecting corporate narratives, was now positioned at the center of its evaluation. Not as a wife seeking vindication, not as an adversary, but as a compliance professional, fulfilling obligation. In the city skyline beyond her window, buildings reflected afternoon light, steady and indifferent. Inside one of those buildings, Aaron felt the first genuine tremor of uncertainty. Inside the apartment, Samantha felt something else entirely. Clarity. The paper trail had begun to speak. And it would not stop now. Forensic accounting does not arrive with sirens. It arrives with spreadsheets. By Wednesday morning, Hawthorne's internal team had flagged transaction clusters inside Northbridge's general ledger. The patterns were subtle enough to avoid immediate suspicion, but repetitive enough to resist coincidence. Samantha logged into the secure portal at 7:15 a.m. A new folder had appeared. Forensic Review. Preliminary Findings. She opened the summary first. Revenue acceleration entries posted within 48 hours of quarterly close. Intercompany adjustments lacking supporting documentation. Executive level override authorizations. Delayed expense recognition shifted to subsequent quarter. She scrolled slowly. Each item referenced timestamps, approval codes, internal routing signatures. Mitchell Grant's authorization appeared repeatedly. So did Aaron Hayes. Her eyes paused on a specific ledger adjustment. Entry ID Q34782. Age. Description Revenue Alignment. Projected Contract Indiana Corridor. Authorized by A. Hayes. Date. Posted September 29th, 11:47 p.m. The contract in question, she knew from earlier documents, had not been formally executed until October 6th. Recognition before execution. She opened the supporting documentation. There was none. At Northbridge headquarters, tension had begun to erode the polished confidence of executive hallways. Brian Keller sat hunched over his monitor, responding to Hawthorne's increasingly precise queries. Mitchell stood behind him. "They're overanalyzing routine adjustments," Mitchell said. Brian did not turn around. "Routine adjustments don't require midnight authorizations." Aaron stood near the conference table, jaw set. "We were stabilizing margins before acquisition review. Everyone does it." Brian's voice dropped. "Not like this." The word "this" carried weight. Aaron felt the edges of control slipping, not publicly, not yet, but internally. He had believed the adjustments were temporary, strategic. He had believed they would be absorbed into future performance. He had not anticipated forensic review at transaction level. Back in the apartment, Samantha opened the internal email archive again. A thread dated September 27th caught her attention. "Mitchell, we need Q3 optics intact before Hawthorne initiates formal audit." Aaron understood. "I'll align Indiana and Michigan projections." Brian, "We don't have signed confirmations." Mitchell, "We will. It's administrative delay. Posted." Samantha read the final word twice. Posted. Not verify it. Not confirm it. Posted. Intent once documented is difficult to reinterpret. She added the thread to her memo addendum. Her documentation remained clinical, detached. Yet beneath her composure, something more personal had shifted. The dinner humiliation had been a symptom. This was structure. The same man who had dismissed compliance inquiries at a dining table had authorized entries that now required explanation under legal scrutiny. And still she did not feel anger. She felt inevitability. Her phone vibrated with an encrypted call from Hawthorne's compliance director. "Your preliminary memo was instrumental," the director said. "We're escalating to full forensic review. If findings confirm intent acquisition, pauses." "Understood," Samantha replied. "There's another issue," he continued. "Executive compensation irregularities. Transfers labeled consulting adjustments." "Any insight?" She glanced toward the joint account file open on her screen. "Those transfers appear in our shared banking records," she said evenly. "They are not reflected in disclosed bonus structures." Silence on the other end. "That may constitute non-disclosure," he said carefully. "It may," she replied. "We'll need documentation. You'll have it." After the call ended, Samantha sat still for several seconds. Providing joint account documentation would formalize personal exposure. It would confirm that marital finances intersected potential executive misconduct. But withholding it would compromise integrity. Integrity for her was not situational. She downloaded bank statements covering the last 6 months, highlighted the transfers, encrypted the file. Before sending, she paused, not out of doubt, but out of acknowledgement. Once transmitted, the process would become irreversible. She pressed send. At Northbridge, Brian received a notification. Additional documentation request. Executive personal compensation reconciliation. He turned slowly toward Aaron. They're looking at personal accounts, Brian said. Aaron's pulse quickened. That's invasive. It's standard when compensation disclosures don't align, Brian replied. Mitchell stepped forward. We control the narrative, he insisted. Consulting adjustments are legitimate. Are they documented? Brian asked. Mitchell hesitated. Aaron felt heat rise behind his collar. They were performance incentives, he said. Mitchell authorized them. Authorized verbally, Brian replied. Silence settled in the room. Documentation integrity. The phrase Samantha had read earlier echoed invisibly in that conference room. By afternoon, Hawthorne's forensic team had mapped revenue acceleration entries against executive compensation timing. The pattern was clear. Quarter-end revenue inflation corresponded with supplemental executive transfers. Not catastrophic sums, but deliberate. In the apartment, Samantha opened a new document. Personal separation, preliminary considerations. She listed practical steps. Independent bank account activation. Consultation with family law attorney confidential. Asset exposure analysis pending regulatory outcome. Secure copies of shared financial records. She did not cry. She did not rage. She wrote. Because regardless of regulatory findings, something in her marriage had already shifted irreversibly. Respect once publicly diminished and privately contradicted by deception does not reconstitute easily. Her phone buzzed again. Aaron. She answered. They're digging into personal compensation, he said, voice tight. Yes. Did you know about those transfers, he asked. I saw them, and I documented them. Silence stretched. You documented them, he repeated. Yes, for what? For accuracy. He exhaled sharply. You always do this. You make everything clinical. Because it is, she replied quietly. This is my career, he snapped. And your documentation, she said. He said nothing more. When the call ended, Samantha closed her eyes briefly. She did not take satisfaction in his anxiety. She recognized it as the natural result of unchecked alignment. At Northbridge, Mitchell convened an emergency executive meeting. We stall, he said. Delay full ledger access. Cite administrative compilation. Brian shook his head. That will trigger suspicion. Aaron remained silent. For the first time, doubt moved through him, not as irritation, but as realization. Hawthorne had not come to celebrate. They had come to evaluate. And someone, perhaps more than someone, had seen through the smoothing. In the early evening, Hawthorne's compliance director sent Samantha a brief message. Preliminary conclusions, probable revenue misrepresentation. Full report pending. Acquisition suspended. Suspended. The word carried weight. It meant investor confidence would pause. It meant board members would question leadership. It meant regulatory thresholds might be crossed. Samantha closed the laptop slowly. Outside, the city lights flickered on one by one. Inside Northbridge's headquarters, fluorescent lights remained harsh and constant. Aaron stared at the suspension notice on his screen. Mitchell cursed under his breath. Brian leaned back exhausted. None of them knew yet how far the forensic review would extend. But the structure of the lie, built from projection alignment and delayed recognition, was no longer invisible. It had been mapped, measured, documented, and documentation once formalized does not disappear because laughter once filled a room. Samantha stood and walked to the window. Below her, traffic moved steadily indifferent to executive anxiety. She did not feel victorious. She felt aligned with truth, with process, with consequence. The collapse, if it came, would not be explosive. It would be procedural. And procedure, once initiated, is difficult to stop. The legal trigger did not announce itself with confrontation. It arrived as a draft report. By Thursday morning, Hawthorne's forensic team had compiled a 47-page preliminary assessment. Samantha received access at 6:32 a.m. She brewed coffee before opening it, not out of avoidance, out of discipline. The report was structured methodically. Executive summary, revenue recognition analysis, compensation irregularities, internal communication review, regulatory exposure assessment. She began with the executive summary. Preliminary findings indicate a pattern of accelerated revenue recognition inconsistent with executed contract timelines. Executive-level authorization documented. Supplemental compensation transfers correlate with recognition periods. Risk of material misrepresentation under SEC disclosure standards. Material misrepresentation. The phrase was precise. Not clerical error. Not accounting oversight. Material. She continued reading. Under revenue recognition analysis, 12 transactions were listed in detail, including entry ID Q34782AH. The Indiana Corridor contract had been posted as revenue prior to execution, despite internal email acknowledgement of pending confirmation. Under compensation irregularities, the 2 consulting adjustment transfers into her joint account were flagged as undisclosed executive incentives. The report did not speculate about motive. It did not assign character judgment. It outlined discrepancy. At 7:11 a.m., a secure message followed. Recommendation: notify Northbridge Board of Directors prior to regulatory filing. Voluntary disclosure may mitigate penalties. Voluntary disclosure. That was the legal threshold. If Northbridge self-reported discrepancies before SEC inquiry, consequences could be reduced. If they concealed or delayed exposure, escalated. Samantha closed her eyes briefly. This was no longer simply an acquisition risk. It was regulatory territory. Her role as external compliance consultant required formal recommendation drafting. She opened a new document. Subject: Compliance Advisory, Immediate Board Notification Recommended. Her language remained controlled. Based on documented discrepancies and executive-level authorization evidence, I recommend immediate internal board disclosure and preparation for voluntary regulatory reporting. Delay may constitute willful concealment under federal securities statutes. She attached supporting references. Then she sent it through encrypted channel. At Northbridge headquarters, the suspension notice had already unsettled the executive floor. Mitchell paced inside his office. Aaron stood near the window, watching delivery trucks move through the yard below. Brian entered holding a printed copy of Hawthorne's preliminary findings. They've escalated, he said. Mitchell snatched the pages, scanning quickly. His jaw hardened. They're exaggerating standard forecasting practices. Brian's voice remained steady. They're referencing email authorization. Yours, Aaron's. Aaron's pulse pounded in his ears. Mitchell turned toward him. You approved the Indiana entry. Because you told me to. Aaron shot back. Brian stepped between them verbally. This isn't about blame. It's about exposure. Mitchell slammed the report onto his desk. We do not self-report. That invites SEC scrutiny. Brian hesitated. They're recommending board notification. Mitchell's eyes narrowed. Who's advising them? Neither man answered. Back in the apartment, Samantha received confirmation that Hawthorne had forwarded her advisory memo to Northbridge's independent board liaison. Nara, the next phase had begun. Board members, often removed from daily executive maneuvering, react differently when presented with documented risk. Their loyalty is to shareholder protection, not executive ego. By noon, Northbridge's board chair, Thomas Whitaker, requested an emergency executive session. Mitchell was summoned. Aaron was instructed to attend. Brian was told to bring full documentation. The email did not include pleasantries. Samantha knew this pattern well. When boards convene urgently, outcomes are rarely cosmetic. Her phone vibrated. Aaron. She answered. They've called an emergency board meeting, he said. His voice no longer carried performance. It carried strain. That's appropriate, she replied. Appropriate, he echoed. Yes. Silence. You knew this would happen, he said slowly. I anticipated escalation, she answered. Did you tell them, he asked. I provided documentation through formal channels. Another silence. You're my wife, he said quietly. I am also a compliance professional, she replied. He exhaled almost a laugh without humor. So this is what that look at dinner was. She did not respond, because the look at dinner had not been about retaliation. It had been about assessment. At 3:00 p.m., the Northbridge board convened via secure conference line. Thomas Whitaker's voice was measured. "We've reviewed Hawthorne's preliminary findings. We require full disclosure from executive leadership." Mitchell spoke first. Forecast alignment was conducted within industry norms. "Industry norms do not include revenue recognition prior to contract execution," Whitaker replied. Aaron felt the room narrowing around him. Brian presented ledger documentation. When the Indiana entry was displayed, Whitaker asked a simple question. "Was the contract signed at the time of recognition?" Brian hesitated. Aaron answered, "No." Silence followed. Whitaker's tone remained even. "Was the board informed of accelerated recognition practices?" "No," Brian admitted. Mitchell attempted to reframe. The contracts were imminent. This was a temporary positioning. "Temporary positioning," Whitaker repeated. "Under SEC definitions that may qualify as material misrepresentation." Aaron felt his throat tighten. Material. The same word Samantha had read hours earlier. Whitaker continued, "We must consider voluntary disclosure." Mitchell objected immediately. "That invites federal investigation." Whitaker's response was controlled. "Failure to disclose invites greater consequence." The meeting adjourned with no resolution, only instruction. Independent legal counsel would be engaged. Full forensic review would proceed. Executive access to financial systems would be temporarily limited pending assessment. Aaron walked out of the conference room, feeling as though the building itself had shifted under his feet. Mitchell avoided eye contact. Brian looked exhausted. In the apartment, Samantha received confirmation of board engagement with independent counsel. The trigger had fully activated. Regulatory procedure would now move beyond internal containment. She closed her laptop and sat quietly. There was no triumph in her expression, only gravity. Her marriage and her professional integrity had converged at the same inflection point. If voluntary disclosure occurred, investigations would follow. If it did not, subpoenas might. Either way, the narrative Aaron had tried to control through perception would now be controlled by documentation. Her phone buzzed again. "Aaron." She answered. "They're restricting access," he said flatly. "That's standard during review. They're talking about voluntary disclosure. That would be wise." His breathing was uneven. "You're so calm, because panic does not alter evidence," she replied. He was silent for several seconds. "Did you ever intend to protect me?" he asked finally. Samantha's voice remained steady. "I intended to protect the truth." The call ended without goodbye. Outside, dusk settled across the city. Inside Northbridge, independent legal counsel began requesting additional files. Inside the apartment, Samantha opened a final document, Divorce Preliminary Inquiry. She typed the name of a discreet family law firm recommended years earlier by a colleague. She did not press send. Not yet. But the draft remained open. Because the legal trigger had not only activated corporate consequence, it had clarified something personal. Trust, once aligned with deception, is not repairable through apology. And Samantha, who had built her life around documentation and discipline, would not ignore the final pattern emerging before her. The board would decide Northbridge's fate. Regulators would decide accountability. She would decide her own exit. The day of the formal signing had been scheduled weeks earlier, back when optimism still filled conference rooms, and Mitchell spoke of seamless transition. Even after the acquisition was officially suspended pending review, Hawthorne maintained the calendar entry. Not to sign, to conclude. Aaron stood in front of the mirror in his office restroom on the 32nd floor of Northbridge's headquarters. He adjusted his tie twice, though it was already straight. The building felt different now, quieter. Assistants spoke in lowered voices. The usual hum of executive certainty had thinned into something more fragile. Anticipation edged with unease. Independent legal counsel had arrived at 8:00 a.m. Two attorneys in charcoal suits now occupied the smaller conference room across from the board chamber. Laptops open, files stacked. Mitchell had insisted on proceeding with the meeting as planned. "It's optics," he told Aaron earlier that morning. "We don't cancel, we control." Aaron nodded automatically, though control no longer felt accessible. At 9:55 a.m., Hawthorne's delegation entered the building. Laura Bennett led them, composed as always. With her were two forensic accountants and senior legal advisor Mark Feldman. None smiled beyond professional courtesy. Aaron met them in the lobby. "Good to see you," he said, extending his hand. Laura shook it lightly. "Thank you for having us." Her tone did not signal warmth or hostility, only purpose. They moved toward the board chamber. Inside, Thomas Whitaker and 3 additional board members were already seated. Independent counsel sat to the right, legal pads prepared. Mitchell stood at the head of the table. "Let's begin," he said briskly, though his voice lacked its usual buoyancy. At 10:03 a.m., the final participant entered. Samantha Torres. She wore a navy suit structured unadorned. Her hair was pulled back neatly. A slim leather folder rested in her hands. For a moment, the room did not react. Then Aaron's breath stalled. Mitchell's expression shifted from impatience to disbelief. Thomas Whitaker spoke first. "Ms. Torres joins us today as Senior Compliance Counsel representing Hawthorne Equity Group." The words were measured, intentional. Aaron felt the floor tilt not physically, but internally. He stared at her, searching for some signal of apology, hesitation, explanation. There was none. Samantha took a seat opposite him. She did not look at him immediately. Instead, she opened her folder and arranged printed documents with deliberate care. Mitchell recovered first. "This is inappropriate," he said sharply. "There's a clear conflict." Independent counsel responded calmly. "Conflict has been reviewed and formally disclosed. Ms. Torres's engagement complies with advisory protocol." Mitchell's jaw tightened. Aaron remained silent. The meeting began without ceremony. Mark Feldman spoke first. "Northbridge's revenue recognition practices have been assessed against federal reporting standards. We will present findings sequentially." Lights dimmed slightly as a screen at the far wall illuminated. Slide 1. Revenue recognition timeline discrepancies. A table appeared mapping contract execution dates against revenue posting dates. Entry ID Q 34782AH. Aaron felt his chest constrict. Mark continued. "This entry reflects revenue posted September 29th. Contract executed October 6th. Mitchell interjected. "Administrative delay." Samantha spoke for the first time. "Email documentation dated September 27th indicates acknowledgement that contract confirmation was pending." Her voice was steady, unemotional. The screen shifted. An email thread appeared. "Mitchell, we need Q3 optics intact before Hawthorne initiates formal audit." Aaron understood. "I'll align Indiana and Michigan projections." "Brian, we don't have signed confirmations. Mitchell, we will. Post it." The room absorbed the text silently. Aaron's name glowed against the screen in black font. Thomas Whitaker folded his hands. "Mr. Hayes," he said evenly, "did you authorize this entry?" Aaron swallowed. "Yes. Were you aware the contract was not yet executed?" "Yes." Mitchell leaned forward. "Context matters. The agreement was imminent." Samantha turned a page in her folder. "Imminence does not satisfy recognition criteria under ASC 606, she said calmly, referencing the accounting standard without emphasis. The slide advanced. Executive compensation variance. 2 transfers highlighted. Consulting adjustment, October 3rd. Consulting adjustment, December 28th. Mark Feldman addressed the board. These transfers were not disclosed in executive compensation filings. Mitchell's voice sharpened. They were performance incentives, documented where independent counsel asked. Silence. Aaron felt heat creeping up his neck. Samantha spoke again. Correlation analysis shows supplemental transfers occurred within 48 hours of accelerated revenue postings. She did not look at Aaron as she said it. She did not need to. The data spoke independently. Brian Keller cleared his throat. "I raised concerns about timing," he said quietly. Mitchell shot him a warning look. Thomas Whitaker addressed the room. "Based on presented documentation, the board must consider voluntary disclosure to the Securities and Exchange Commission." The words settled like weight. Mitchell protested immediately. "This is overreach. We can correct internally." Mark Feldman responded evenly. "Failure to disclose prior to external inquiry may constitute willful concealment." Aaron felt something fracture inside him, not pride, not ego, illusion. He had believed alignment was strategy. He had believed smoothing was temporary. He had believed control belonged to those who projected it. Across the table, Samantha remained composed. There was no triumph in her posture, no visible satisfaction, only professional completion. Thomas Whitaker turned to Aaron again. "Mr. Hayes, do you contest the authenticity of the documentation presented?" Aaron stared at the screen at his own email at the ledger entry at the timestamp. "No," he said quietly. Mitchell stood abruptly. "You're throwing away everything we built because of technical interpretation." Samantha finally looked at Aaron directly, not with accusation, with clarity. Technical interpretation. It was the phrase he had used at dinner dismissing compliance inquiries. Now it echoed hollowly. The board recessed for private deliberation. Executives were asked to step outside. In the hallway, Aaron stood several feet from Samantha. Neither spoke immediately. Finally, he said, "You could have warned me." Her expression did not change. "About documentation?" she asked softly. "About this," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the boardroom doors. "I advised through formal channels," she replied. "I'm your husband. And you were senior operations director authorizing misrepresentation." The words were not sharp. They were factual. He searched her face for anger. There was none. Only distance. "You planned this," he said. "No," she answered. "I documented it." The boardroom doors opened. Thomas Whitaker stepped out. "The board has voted to suspend executive authority pending voluntary disclosure preparation," he announced. "Mr. Grant, Mr. Hayes, you are relieved of financial authorization access, effective immediately." Mitchell's face drained of color. Aaron felt the final thread of certainty snap. Independent counsel handed them written notices. Hawthorne's delegation began packing their materials. Samantha closed her folder carefully. As she stood to leave, she paused not dramatically, not performatively, just long enough to meet Aaron's eyes once more. "I never needed to embarrass you," she said quietly. "You did that yourself." There was no malice in her voice, only conclusion. She walked out of the board chamber without looking back. Behind her, the machinery of regulatory procedure had begun its formal rotation. Voluntary disclosure would be filed. SEC inquiry would follow. Mitchell's authority had dissolved in a single vote. Aaron remained standing in the hallway long after the others dispersed. The building that once felt expansive now felt narrow. Control had never belonged to projection. It had belonged to documentation. And the woman he had once reduced to spectacle at a dinner table had just demonstrated that power requires no volume at all. Voluntary disclosure was filed at 4:17 p.m. The document, drafted by independent counsel and reviewed by the board, outlined preliminary identification of revenue recognition inconsistencies and executive-level authorization variances. It emphasized cooperation. It emphasized internal corrective action. It did not emphasize intent. Intent would be determined by regulators. By early evening, the Securities and Exchange Commission acknowledged receipt. An inquiry number was assigned. Northbridge Freight Systems was now under formal federal review. Aaron sat alone in his office, though office was no longer an accurate description. His financial system access had been suspended. His executive assistant had been reassigned temporarily. His keycard privileges were restricted to limited areas. Through the glass wall, he could see employees moving more cautiously than usual. News traveled quickly inside corporate ecosystems, even before press releases. Mitchell had not returned from his meeting with the board. Brian Keller had closed his door and not reopened it. Aaron's phone vibrated with a text from Mitchell. "This isn't over." We push back. Aaron stared at the message. Push back against what documentation? He did not reply. Across the city, Samantha sat in Hawthorne's Chicago satellite office for the first time in nearly 3 years. She had chosen not to conduct the final meeting remotely. Presence matters in moments of procedural gravity. Laura Bennett entered the conference room carrying 2 coffees. "You handled that with restraint," Laura said, setting one down in front of Samantha. "Restraint is efficient," Samantha replied. Laura studied her briefly. "This isn't personal for you." Samantha considered the question. "It is," she said, "but not professionally." Laura nodded slowly. "The board's moving quickly. They're preparing to terminate Mitchell pending investigation. Aaron will likely face internal review." "Likely?" Samantha asked. Laura offered a faint, almost sympathetic expression. "His email authorization is direct." Samantha folded her hands on the table. "I understand." There was no tremor in her voice, but when she returned to her apartment later that evening, the quiet felt heavier than usual. Aaron was already home. He stood when she entered. "You went into my building as their lawyer," he said. She set her bag down carefully. "As compliance counsel, you could have recused yourself. I disclosed conflict and received clearance." "That's not what I mean." She met his eyes steadily. "I know," she said. He paced once across the living room. "They suspended me," he said finally. "Do you understand what that means?" "Yes. It means everything I built is on pause because of interpretation." "Because of documentation," she corrected softly. He turned sharply. "Stop saying that like it's neutral." "It is neutral," she replied. "Numbers are." "You're not neutral," he said. She did not deny it. "I am aligned," she said instead. "With them. With compliance." He laughed once bitterly. "You care more about rules than your own husband." She held his gaze. "I care about integrity." The word hovered between them. He looked away first. "I thought we were a team," he said quietly. "We were," she replied, when he asked, "when we respected the same boundaries." He sank onto the couch, exhaustion replacing anger. "They're going to make an example of me," he said. "If you cooperate, fully penalties may be reduced." He stared at her, disbelief overtaking frustration. "Listen to yourself." She did, and she did not flinch, because she had listened to him at the dinner table laughing as water dripped from her dress, while executives applauded dominance. She had listened when he called documentation over-analysis. She had listened when he minimized discrepancies. Now she was speaking with the same composure she had always maintained. "I never intended harm," he said finally. "I know," she replied. The admission startled him. "You do, yes." "Then why intent does not erase impact," she said quietly. Silence followed. In another part of the city, Thomas Whitaker met with Northbridge's independent legal counsel to draft executive suspension letters. Mitchell Grant's termination was being prepared pending SEC findings. Brian Keller had voluntarily submitted supplemental documentation and was negotiating limited immunity in exchange for cooperation. By midnight, a financial news outlet had published a brief headline: "Northbridge Freight Systems announces voluntary SEC disclosure amid accounting review." It was not explosive. Not yet. But markets respond to uncertainty. Pre-market trading would reflect that. Samantha stood by the apartment window, watching traffic thin. Behind her, Aaron remained seated, shoulders slumped. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said. "It always goes this far when documentation exists," she replied. He rubbed his temples. "You never shouted. You never accused. No. Were you always planning this?" She turned toward him. "I was always observing. The distinction mattered." He searched her face again, not for anger now, but for any remaining alliance. "Are you going to leave?" he asked quietly. She did not answer immediately, because leaving is not an emotional impulse for someone like Samantha. It is a conclusion drawn from evidence. I have scheduled a consultation, she said at last. His eyes closed briefly. For divorce, yes. The word did not echo. It settled. When he asked, next week. He nodded once, almost mechanically. I suppose that's documented too, he said faintly. Everything important is, she replied. But her voice softened slightly. Not with pity, with acknowledgement. Because despite everything, she did not hate him. Hatred requires emotional volatility. What she felt was clarity. The next morning, Northbridge stock dropped 9% at market open. Mitchell Grant issued a public statement citing temporary accounting review. It was measured, controlled. By afternoon, the board formally terminated him. Aaron received his own notice of suspension pending investigation. He forwarded it to Samantha without comment. She read it, saved it, not for leverage, for record. That evening, as she organized printed documents into labeled folders, corporate, financial, personal. Aaron watched from across the room. You're so calm, he said again. Because this was avoidable, she replied. He absorbed the sentence slowly. It was not accusation. It was fact. Outside, the city continued as it always did. Buses, moving lights, blinking people crossing intersections, without knowledge of corporate collapse unfolding above them. Inside the apartment, two lives that had once moved in parallel now stood at separate thresholds. The company would face regulators. Executives would face consequence. And Samantha Torres would face something quieter but equally decisive. Departure. Not in anger, not in spectacle, in dignity. The evidence did not explode into public scandal. It unfolded in layers. 3 days after voluntary disclosure, the Securities and Exchange Commission formally requested supplemental documentation under Section 21A of the Securities Exchange Act. The language was procedural. The implications were not. Northbridge's board authorized full cooperation. Independent counsel converted the preliminary forensic report into a structured evidentiary package. Samantha reviewed the final draft before transmission. 47 pages had become 82. Appendices included. Transaction-level ledger exports, time-stamped authorization logs, executive email chains, audio transcript excerpts, compensation transfer confirmations. Each document had been indexed and cross-referenced. This was no longer internal concern. It was federal review. At Northbridge headquarters, Aaron was asked to surrender his company laptop and access credentials. The IT department imaged his hard drive in the presence of legal counsel. It was standard protocol. Standard protocol had become the defining phrase of his unraveling. He watched as an IT technician sealed his laptop inside an evidence bag. You'll receive notice regarding further interview scheduling, independent counsel informed him. He nodded numbly. Mitchell Grant did not attend that morning. His termination had been finalized. Corporate email access revoked. Security escorted him from the building quietly. No headlines yet, just formal steps. Across town, in a secure conference room at Hawthorne's office, Samantha sat with Laura Bennett and Mark Feldman as they finalized the transmission packet to the SEC. Mark scrolled through the email thread projected on screen. Do we include the full audio transcript or summary excerpts, he asked. Full transcript, Samantha replied calmly. Context matters. Laura studied her briefly. There's no benefit to minimizing, she added. Samantha nodded. The audio file had been particularly revealing. In it, Mitchell's voice was crisp. We smooth Q3, we stabilize perception, Hawthorne commits. Brian's uneasy response followed. Aaron's voice entered later. We just need to hold alignment through signing. The transcript included timestamps and metadata verification. It required no commentary. Mark attached the file. Once this is sent, he said quietly, there's no procedural retreat. There isn't now, Samantha replied. He pressed send. At 2:14 p.m., the evidentiary package entered federal record. Meanwhile, Aaron sat in his apartment staring at a printed copy of the suspension letter. Samantha had left earlier that morning for meetings. The silence felt heavier without even her quiet presence. His phone buzzed. Brian Keller. Aaron answered immediately. They've scheduled interviews, Brian said. SEC counsel wants statements next week. Aaron swallowed. You cooperating? Yes. A pause. You? Aaron looked at the suspension letter again. Yes, he said. Brian exhaled. Mitchell's trying to frame this as collective forecasting. It wasn't collective, Aaron replied quietly. There was no anger in his voice now, only recognition. After the call ended, he walked into the bedroom and opened Samantha's neatly organized document folders on the dresser. Corporate, financial, personal. He had never paid attention to how precisely she structured information. Even her labeling was consistent dates, aligned tabs, color-coded. He opened the corporate folder. Inside were printed copies of ledger discrepancies, email threads, and compensation analysis. She had not hidden them. She had not dramatized them. She had simply preserved them. He closed the folder slowly. Across town, Samantha finished a call with Hawthorne's compliance director. The SEC will likely expand inquiry to executive intent, he said. Given documented authorization, language individual liability is possible. I understand, she replied. Are you prepared for testimony? If required, yes. The word carried no tremor. After the call, she remained seated alone in the conference room for several minutes. She did not feel triumph. She felt the weight of inevitability. Her phone vibrated. Unknown number. She answered. This is Special Counsel David Levin with the Securities and Exchange Commission, the voice said. We're coordinating preliminary interviews. As compliance advisor, we may request clarification regarding your findings. I'm available, she replied. We appreciate your cooperation. The call ended. The path forward had solidified. In the early evening, she returned home. Aaron was sitting at the kitchen table, the folders closed neatly before him. I read them, he said. I assumed you would, she replied. You documented everything. Yes. Even the dinner. Yes. He flinched slightly. I thought that was just embarrassment. It was context, she said. For what? For judgment. He leaned back in his chair, studying her, as if seeing a structure he had overlooked. You never yelled, he said. No. You never threatened. No. You just waited. I prepared. Silence settled between them. I didn't think it was fraud, he said finally. I thought it was timing. It became fraud when timing was documented as intentional misrepresentation, she replied gently. He nodded slowly. I see that now. For the first time, she detected something different in his tone. Not defensiveness, understanding. Are they going to charge me? He asked quietly. I don't know, she said honestly. That depends on cooperation and prosecutorial discretion. You speak like a lawyer, he said faintly. I am one. He gave a hollow laugh. Outside, a news alert buzzed across financial networks. SEC opens inquiry into Northbridge freight systems following voluntary disclosure. It was still measured, still procedural, but the word inquiry carries its own gravity. Aaron's phone lit up repeatedly with messages from colleagues, acquaintances, reporters seeking comment. He turned it face down. I'm sorry, he said suddenly. The words were not loud. They were not theatrical. They were stripped of performance. Samantha looked at him carefully. For what she asked. For minimizing you. For dismissing what you saw. For the dinner. For thinking I could manage perception without consequence. She listened. Apology, when offered without deflection, deserves acknowledgement. I accept that you didn't intend harm, she said. He waited. But intention doesn't erase what happened. He nodded. I know. They sat in silence again. In another part of the city, SEC counsel reviewed the transmitted audio transcript. Language was being parsed. Authorization phrases analyzed. Intent weighed against regulatory definition. Northbridge's stock dipped further in after-hours trading. Mitchell Grant issued no statement. Brian Keller prepared his own counsel. And Samantha Torres closed her laptop for the evening. The evidence had been delivered. The legal machinery was in motion. There would be interviews, potential settlements, possible charges. But in this quiet apartment, the most personal evidence had already been evaluated. Trust, once broken under documentation, does not restore itself through apology alone. Samantha stood and walked toward the bedroom. Aaron remained at the table. "Will you stay tonight?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "For how long?" She paused. "Long enough to finish what must be finished. Not as wife, not as adversary. As someone who understands that closure like compliance requires completeness." Outside, the city lights flickered against dark glass. Inside, consequences continued unfolding, precise, documented, irreversible. The fall did not come with handcuffs. It came with letters. Certified envelopes began arriving the following Monday, one addressed to Aaron Hayes, another to Northbridge Freight Systems, and a third to Mitchell Grant's private residence. The return address bore the seal of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Aaron held his envelope for several seconds before opening it. Samantha sat across from him at the dining table, her own unopened mail neatly stacked beside her. He broke the seal. Notice of formal investigation and request for testimony. The language was restrained, almost courteous. "You are hereby notified that the Securities and Exchange Commission has initiated a formal investigation into potential violations of federal securities laws related to revenue recognition practices and executive compensation disclosures." He lowered the paper. "They've escalated," he said quietly. "Yes," Samantha replied. Her own notice had arrived that morning as well, requesting cooperation as compliance advisor and potential witness. She had expected it. Aaron continued reading. The letter outlined possible violations under Section 10B and Rule 10b-5, material misstatements or omissions in connection with the purchase or sale of securities. He exhaled slowly. "That sounds criminal," he said. "It can be," she answered calmly, "or it can result in civil penalties. It depends on intent and cooperation." He folded the letter carefully, as though precision might soften consequence. At Northbridge headquarters, the board issued a public statement before market open. CEO Mitchell Grant terminated effective immediately. Senior Operations Director Aaron Hayes suspended pending investigation. Full cooperation pledged with federal authorities. The statement avoided dramatic language. But markets react to implication more than vocabulary. Northbridge stock fell another 11% by noon. Inside the company, interim leadership was appointed. Thomas Whitaker assumed temporary oversight alongside an external restructuring consultant. Departments were instructed to preserve all documentation. Internal communications were archived. Brian Keller had retained personal counsel and formally agreed to cooperate fully with investigators. In exchange, his attorney was negotiating mitigation. Mitchell Grant, according to financial news reports, had hired a high-profile defense firm. Aaron watched the scrolling headlines on his phone without responding to messages. Colleagues sent cautious texts, some sympathetic, others distancing themselves carefully. Mitchell finally called. Aaron let it ring twice before answering. "This is collapsing because they're overreaching," Mitchell said sharply. It was forecasting, not fraud. Aaron remained quiet. "You authorized those entries," Mitchell continued, "but at my direction." Aaron stared at the city skyline through the window. "Yes," he said. "So we present it as strategic interpretation," Mitchell insisted. "No admission of intent?" Aaron felt something settle inside him, not anger, not loyalty. Separation. "They have the emails," he said quietly. "They have the audio." Mitchell paused. "You're not going to turn on me," he said. Aaron considered the phrasing. "This isn't about turning," he replied. "It's about documentation." The word felt different now. Not defensive, accurate. Mitchell's voice hardened. "Be careful." The line disconnected. Across the table, Samantha had heard only Aaron's side of the conversation. "He called," she said. "Yes, and he wants narrative control." She nodded once. That option passed. He studied her. "You were right." She did not respond to the validation. Because being right in matters of collapse is not victory. Later that afternoon, Aaron met with his own attorney, a mid-level white-collar defense specialist recommended by a colleague. They sat in a modest downtown office document spread across a polished wood table. Intent is the key variable, the attorney explained. Did you knowingly misrepresent revenue? Aaron hesitated. I aligned projected contracts with anticipated closure, he said. Did you know contracts were unsigned? Yes. The attorney nodded slowly. That complicates defense. Cooperation may be your strongest position. Aaron leaned back, exhaustion evident. What about prison, he asked bluntly. The attorney did not answer immediately. Civil penalties are more common in cases involving voluntary disclosure and cooperation, he said carefully. But I cannot guarantee outcomes. Aaron left the office with no illusions remaining. Meanwhile, Samantha attended a preparatory meeting at Hawthorne's office with SEC counsel via secure conference line. We appreciate your detailed documentation, Special Counsel Levin said. Your memo chronology clarifies timeline significantly. I focused on timestamp consistency, she replied. That will be helpful. They reviewed email language ledger entries, compensation correlation. Questions were precise. At one point, Levin asked, did you ever confront Mr. Hayes directly regarding recognition timing before escalation? Yes, she answered. In private conversation. And his response, he characterized it as strategic alignment. A pause. Did you believe at that time it constituted misrepresentation? I believe documentation did not support recognition. Her tone remained neutral. No personal commentary entered her responses. When the call ended, Laura Bennett lingered in the conference room doorway. You're handling this with extraordinary restraint, Laura said. Samantha gathered her papers. Restraint prevents distortion, she replied. That evening, Aaron returned home earlier than usual. I'm cooperating, he said immediately. I assumed you would. I told my attorney everything. She nodded. They're probably going to fine me, he continued. Maybe bar me from executive roles for a period. Possibly. He hesitated. And if they charge? We face that when we know, she replied. He studied her. You still say we? She held his gaze. For procedural clarity, she said gently. Not for marriage. He understood. In the following days, SEC interviews began. Brian Keller met with investigators first. His testimony aligned with documented emails. He described pressure to smooth quarter-end reporting. Mitchell's attorney issued statements denying intentional wrongdoing. Aaron's interview was scheduled for Thursday morning. The night before, he sat alone in the living room, reviewing printed copies of his own emails. Align Indiana and Michigan projections. Hold alignment through signing. He read the phrases slowly. They no longer sounded strategic. They sounded deliberate. Samantha emerged from the bedroom with a folder in hand. These are the documents you may want to reference, she said, placing them on the table. Context matters. He looked at her. You're helping me. I'm ensuring accuracy. He almost smiled. You've been ensuring accuracy for months. Yes. He picked up the folder. Why didn't you leave immediately after the dinner, he asked quietly. Because I needed clarity, she replied. About the company, about us. He absorbed that. And now I have it. The next morning, Aaron entered the SEC's regional office downtown. The building was unremarkable. No marble columns, no grand spectacle. Inside, he was sworn in. Questions were methodical. Did you authorize revenue entry Q 34,782A? Yes. Were you aware the contract was unsigned at the time? Yes. Did you receive supplemental compensation within 48 hours of that entry? Yes. Were those transfers disclosed in executive filings? No, why not? He paused. Because we believed acquisition would stabilize numbers before disclosure was required. Silence followed. Intent had now been spoken aloud. The interview lasted 3 hours. When he exited the building, he did not feel rage. He felt gravity. Back at the apartment, Samantha sat at the dining table reviewing divorce consultation notes. asset division frameworks, legal timelines, filing procedures. When Aaron entered, she looked up. "It's done," he said. "For today," she replied. He nodded. They asked about intent, and I told them the truth. She studied him for a long moment. "That was wise." He exhaled slowly. "I should have listened to you sooner." "Yes," she said softly. There was no cruelty in the affirmation, only finality. Outside, Northbridge continued operating under interim leadership. Trucks still moved. Contracts were renegotiated. The company would likely survive diminished, but intact. Mitchell's career, however, was unraveling publicly. Aaron's future remained uncertain, dependent on cooperation, on regulatory discretion, on judicial interpretation. And Samantha Torres, who had once sat quietly at a dinner table while water dripped from her dress, had not raised her voice once. She had documented. She had aligned with truth. And now, as the fall completed its procedural descent, she prepared for her own departure. Not in anger, not in spectacle, in dignity. The divorce filing was submitted on a Tuesday morning at 9:12 a.m. There was no argument preceding it, no raised voices, no last-minute plea. Samantha sat in the quiet office of her attorney, Margaret Ellis, and signed the final page with a steady hand. Grounds: irreconcilable differences. No allegations of infidelity. No claims of abuse. No dramatic language. Just dissolution. Margaret reviewed the paperwork once more. "Given the ongoing federal investigation, Asset Division will require careful sequencing," she said. "But your documentation is thorough." "It needed to be," Samantha replied. Margaret studied her for a moment. "You're certain, yes? Even if the investigation resolves favorably for him," Samantha paused, not because she doubted her decision, but because she understood the weight of certainty. "This is not about outcome," she said quietly. "It's about alignment." Margaret nodded. Outside the office, the city moved as it always did. Commuters hurrying delivery trucks, idling conversations, overlapping and passing. Inside, a marriage ended without spectacle. That evening, Samantha returned to the apartment she had once shared with Aaron and placed the divorce documents neatly on the dining table. He was already home. He looked at the envelope before opening it. "I assumed," he said softly. "Yes." He read the first page in silence. No accusations, no moral commentary, just formal termination. "I thought maybe." He stopped. "Maybe," what she asked gently. "That once this stabilized, we could—" She did not interrupt him. "Reset." The word felt fragile. "This isn't about instability," she replied. "It's about foundation." He folded the papers carefully. "You think I can't rebuild? I think you will," she said. He looked up at her, surprised. "You do, yes." "Then why?" "Because rebuilding requires accountability," she said quietly, "and I cannot be both witness and wife." The sentence lingered between them. He understood it slowly. In the weeks since the investigation began, something inside Aaron had shifted. The sharp edges of defensiveness had softened into reflection. He had admitted intent in his testimony. He had agreed to cooperate fully. His attorney had informed him that civil penalties were likely, perhaps temporary executive disqualification, but criminal charges appeared less probable due to voluntary disclosure and cooperation. The company would survive. He might professionally. But Samantha had already moved beyond that calculation. Boxes appeared gradually in the living room, neatly labeled, precisely packed. Books, legal reference materials, personal journals, documents. She did not rush. She did not delay. She worked in measured increments. Aaron watched her pack the kitchenware one evening. "Do you remember when we bought those plates?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "We argued over color. You wanted red. You said neutral lasts longer." She placed the last plate in the box. "Neutral does last longer," she said softly. He almost smiled. The media cycle around Northbridge had intensified briefly, then shifted to other stories. Mitchell Grant faced formal civil charges for material misrepresentation. Brian Keller's cooperation agreement reduced his exposure. Aaron's case remained under review, though reports suggested settlement negotiations were ongoing. One afternoon, Aaron received notice the SEC intended to pursue civil penalties, but would not recommend criminal charges contingent upon continued cooperation and settlement. He read the letter twice before handing it to Samantha. "They're offering settlement terms," he said. She reviewed it calmly. "It's reasonable," she said, "given the documentation." He nodded. "I'll accept." There was no bravado in the decision, only acceptance. That evening, they sat across from each other at the dining table one final time. The apartment felt hollow now, most of Samantha's belongings already moved to a modest condo she had secured quietly weeks earlier. "I keep thinking about that dinner," Aaron said. She did not look away. "What about it?" she asked. "I thought I was controlling the room," he said. "I thought laughing meant power. And now I understand it meant insecurity." She studied him. "Growth, when it arrives, is often late." "I never wanted to hurt you," he added. "I know. But I did, yes." Silence followed. "I didn't see you," he said quietly. "You saw what was convenient," she replied gently. He absorbed the truth without argument. "Do you hate me?" he asked. "No." The answer came without hesitation. "I don't." He exhaled. "Why not?" "Because hatred distorts judgment," she said. "And I prefer clarity." He almost laughed. "You always preferred clarity." "Yes." She stood and walked toward the window. Chicago's skyline shimmered in evening light. The city did not pause for personal collapse or corporate restructuring. It continued. "I used to think strength meant volume," Aaron said from behind her. She turned slightly. "It doesn't," she replied. He nodded. "I see that now." The next morning, Samantha carried the final box to her car. Aaron followed, offering to help. She allowed him. At the trunk, he hesitated. "This is really it," he said. "Yes." He searched for words that did not feel rehearsed. "I hope you find—" He paused. "Alignment," she suggested softly. He gave a faint smile. "Yes." She closed the trunk. "I hope you learn from this," she said. "I will." They stood facing each other in the quiet parking lot. No dramatic farewell. No raised voices. Just two people acknowledging the end of something that had once held promise. She extended her hand. He took it. "Goodbye, Aaron. Goodbye, Samantha." She entered her car and drove away without looking back. Not because she was cold, but because departure once chosen carefully does not require spectacle. Aaron remained standing in the lot until her car disappeared into traffic. He felt loss, but beneath it, something else. Accountability. Inside the now nearly empty apartment echoes replaced conversation. Northbridge would continue under new leadership. The SEC settlement would finalize in the coming months. Civil penalties would be paid. Executive titles would not return easily. And Samantha Torres, who had never shouted, never retaliated publicly, never humiliated in return, had left with something intact. Dignity. The condo Samantha chose was not large. It sat on the 14th floor of a quiet building overlooking the Chicago River, far enough from Northbridge's headquarters to avoid accidental familiarity, close enough to remain connected to the city she had built her career in. The first night there, she did not unpack everything. She arranged only what was necessary. Laptop on the desk. Legal reference books aligned on the shelf. One framed photograph of her parents at her Harvard graduation. She stood at the window, watching the river carry reflections of city lights in slow distortion. Silence did not feel empty. It felt earned. In the weeks that followed, the SEC settlement became official. Mitchell Grant agreed to substantial civil penalties and a multi-year bar from serving as an officer or director of any publicly traded company. Brian Keller paid reduced fines under cooperation terms. Aaron Hayes accepted civil penalties, disgorgement of supplemental compensation, and a 2-year prohibition from executive financial authority roles. No criminal charges were filed. The headlines were concise. Northbridge resolves SEC inquiry with civil settlement. Public interest moved on. Corporate scandal rarely sustains attention unless spectacle accompanies it. There had been no spectacle, only documentation. Samantha continued her work with Hawthorne Equity Group, formally reinstated now as Senior Compliance Counsel. Her role expanded quietly. She led internal training sessions on revenue recognition integrity. She reviewed acquisition targets with sharpened attention. Colleagues regarded her with subtle respect, not because of the Northbridge case alone, but because of the precision with which she handled it. One afternoon, Laura Bennett paused by her office door. "You could have been louder," Laura said. "Yes," Samantha replied. "You weren't." "No." Laura nodded thoughtfully. "That's why it worked." Samantha returned to her files. Strength does not require volume. It requires consistency. Meanwhile, Aaron adjusted to a life without titles. He accepted a mid-level consulting role at a smaller logistics firm, non-executive operational supervised. The salary was lower, the authority narrower. But he did not resist it. He attended compliance workshops voluntarily. He met regularly with a professional ethics advisor recommended by his attorney. For the first time in years, he read accounting standards without seeking loopholes. He thought often about alignment, not as strategy, but as integrity. One evening, months after Samantha's departure, he sat alone in his modest apartment reviewing old emails. Not out of regret, but reflection. He replayed the dinner in his memory. The laughter, the glass, the water-darkening fabric. He understood now that humiliation had not been dominance. It had been exposure of insecurity, of immaturity, of unexamined ego. He reached for his phone, hesitated, then set it down again. Some conversations, once completed, do not require reopening. Across the river, Samantha finished reviewing a compliance audit report and closed her laptop. The room was quiet except for distant traffic. She walked to the small bookshelf near her desk and removed a slim folder. Inside was a printed screenshot. A still image from security footage at the Whitmore Hotel, acquired through formal legal request during documentation review. It showed the moment just after the water had been poured. She stood upright, composed, unmoved. The image was not preserved for revenge. It was preserved for memory, not of humiliation, of decision. She placed the folder back on the shelf. Her phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. Pro Bono Seminar. Financial Literacy for First-Generation College Students. She smiled faintly. Her path had not narrowed after divorce. It had clarified. On the day of the seminar, she stood before a small classroom of students from immigrant families, much like her own upbringing. She spoke about contracts, about documentation, about the quiet power of understanding numbers before they are used against you. She did not mention Aaron. She did not mention Northbridge. She spoke about integrity. Afterward, a young woman approached her. "Did you ever have to stand up to someone powerful?" the student asked. Samantha considered the question. "Yes," she said. "Were you scared?" "Yes." "What did you do?" "I documented," she replied. The student frowned slightly. "That's it. That's enough." The simplicity of the answer lingered. Later that evening, Samantha walked along the river alone. The air was crisp. The city lights reflected in soft currents below. She did not feel triumphant. Triumph suggests defeat of another. She felt steady. A text message arrived. Unknown number. She opened it. "I finalized settlement today. I hope you're well. Aaron." She read it once, then responded. "I'm glad it's resolved. I wish you clarity moving forward." She did not add more. There was nothing left unsaid that required reopening. As she slipped her phone back into her coat pocket, she understood something quietly profound. Power is not reclaimed by humiliating in return. It is reclaimed by refusing to be defined by humiliation at all. The dinner that once seemed like spectacle had become footnote. The investigation had become precedent. The marriage had become lesson. She returned to her condo and stood once more at the window. Below, the river moved steadily, unconcerned with past distortions. She thought of her parents, of long nights, cleaning offices, of learning to observe before speaking. She thought of Harvard classrooms, of Hawthorne conference tables, of the boardroom where documentation replaced laughter. and she thought of the moment she had chosen not to react publicly, but to prepare privately. Some victories echo loudly. Others are measured in what remains intact when noise fades. Samantha Torres had lost a marriage. She had witnessed a corporate fall. She had stood in rooms where men mistook performance for power. And she had walked away without raising her voice. In the quiet of her condo, she turned off the lights one by one. Not as retreat, as rest. Because dignity once chosen does not require audience. If this story stayed with you, perhaps it's because you've seen moments like that dinner where laughter hides insecurity and silence hides strength. If you believe integrity matters, even when no one applauds it, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Justice moves quietly, but it travels far. And if stories about accountability, quiet resilience, and earned dignity resonate with you, consider subscribing. There are more stories where power isn't loud, but it is undeniable.